Hi everyone, excited to present to you today the recipe for success in the face of adversity, which I think is certainly a relevant topic to discuss with regards to the current situation we're currently all in. Now I shall be exploring this topic from two angles. First, from an individual perspective, and secondly, from a group team level. Just a quick introduction. Hopefully this will work. There you go. My name is Becca, Global Account Manager at Assets First. Hello, lovely to meet you all. For those who are not necessarily aware of what we do here at Assets First, we were first established in 2002. We're actually originally a French business, and today we stretch across the globe. Our tool can be used for either talent acquisition, talent development, or talent mobility. So we pretty much do the full life cycle. Now, our tool can help you predict out of those candidates that you see applying for both an internal and external role, ultimately who will be the most successful within the role. And we do this through the assessment of their soft skills. So the promise that we make to our clients is if candidates are able to give us a maximum 30 minutes of their time, then which is pretty much equivalent to the time that you would take watching a Black Mirror episode. We are able to establish ultimately how those individuals who apply for a role will be most successful. So when looking at this graph here, we see level of performance versus level of happiness. Our tool can help find those individuals who will sit in this upper right quartile. Those who will be really engaged, really happy, really want to come to work, and because of that, they'll be performing above and beyond the expectation. Now, what's great is we can do this, we can predict this with a success rate of 85%. Today, we have over 3,500 clients that stretch across 40 different countries. Now, I don't present you with these, big numbers just to show off, but it's ultimately to demonstrate that we are actually in a very privileged position to be able to observe what is going on in the HR and TA departments across both large and small companies in different industries across the globe. And so we can really understand, those overarching successes, and also areas of improvement and frustration within the industry today. Before I touch upon those factors that affect success in the workplace, especially during difficult times, I just want to focus on this question here. What do we all have in common? And what we will see, we all have in common is the fact that we all search for happiness. Now, happiness is considered differently for different people. For some, it's that dream of eternal youth. For others, it could be fame. Some others, maybe, a fantastic car collection. Others, partying. And maybe your thing is wanting to holiday or find that perfect Instagrammable photo, although I'm pretty sure right now all of us would just like to be on holiday. So the question is there a magic formula to this happiness? Well, in the study of psychology, there is a branch of psychology that focuses in on what it is that somebody does or wants to do that makes them happy in their life. Now, what this study presents is the fact that 50% of those aspects that make an individual happy actually stem from their genetics. Now, we could say that actually, well, that's really annoying, because in theory, does that mean that there are some people who are literally formed to be happy and others who are less capable of being happy? But that can't worry us. Why? Because equally, again, in psychology, we have something that we call the formula of happiness. Now, this formula of happiness looks like this, and it highlights that it's not all about genetics, but that there are three key aspects involved. First off, you can see that you need to be in good health, which is, always recommended. Secondly, you must have found, your one true love, which, yes, is easier said than done, and be in a job that allows you to be fulfilled. So when considering first off the element of love in this equation, studies have shown that we need to have met and partnered with between 5 and 14 partners before we find, that kind of one true love. But importantly, 1 in 2 times, so 50% of those couples who do find love, who do marry, end in divorce. Now, whichever way you look at it, from whatever angle, it's a pretty significant number. But what about those who actually stay married? the stats show us that 2 out of 3 of those will be in relationships that you could define as not satisfied. And so what that actually means is when you're searching for the typical, you know, the one, there is a chance of 18% that you will remain married and satisfied within that relationship. Now, that's big. And you could say, well, okay, if we can't find happiness there, where the hell are we going to be finding it? But what interests us the most at Assess First is the work factor, the work element of that equation. That again is complicated. We know something is broken. Why do I say that with such confidence? Well, when we follow 100 individuals across a time frame of 18 months, what we see is after 6 months, 17% of those people who started in a company are no longer in the post. Either they have been let go or maybe resigned. After 12 months, that number increases to 36%. And after 18 months, we're seeing nearly half of those who started are no longer with the business. Now, we estimate that 24 months is the kind of average time it takes for somebody to feel confident and high performing in their professional role. And so what does that mean? Well, 1 in every 2 cases after 18 months, well, the recruitment doesn't work, the process doesn't work. And so the question, or the most important question to ask, is why? Why in 50% of the times of these times whereby you're following an existing recruitment process, does it not function? Well, as you can see here, 9 times out of 10, it isn't due to their technical competencies. It's not because they can't necessarily do the job. It is actually due to their behavioural adjustments, i.e. maybe they don't get on well with their managers or their team around them. And when we look at those people who then stay with the company, well, 95% of those are disengaged or actively disengaged in what they do on a day-to-day basis, meaning that only 5% of the workforce, on average, is motivated in their post. Another problem that has come to our attention is that we spend quite a bit of time at work, approximately a quarter of our life at work, which equates to, again, approximately 54% of our waking time, potentially over 80,000 hours in the office, meaning that you spend more time with your colleagues than you do your friends, your family, your children. And so it's really important to look at our practices. We cannot allow ourselves to recruit somebody who will not be happy in their job. And if we want to change that, we must look at how we present ourselves in the working world, the manner that we are going to recruit, the manner in which we're going to support people. And this that ultimately involves 2 things. The first is to allow everybody to express their talents and their full potential. The second is to allow everyone to live their job with passion. Somebody who is passionate in their job is going to be 6 times more performant in their area of work. So it's ultimately a win-win. But for that, we must focus on the essentials. And the essentials, well, they're that human factor, the aspects that make somebody individual and unique. It's the people. Above and beyond their CV, above and beyond their experiences, above and beyond where they've gone to school or university, who are they? What is their potential? And what we must take into account is that every individual has a unique combination of 3 key factors. The first is what they can do. Second, what they want to do. And thirdly, the way in which they behave, how they do things. And what they can do, so that looks at their capacity to learn, to reason, their ability to pick up and absorb information. Their motivations, this is what, will push them to come to work every day and to give a little bit more effort. And personality, this is their psychological spine. So this is what will drive the consistency in their behaviors. Now, at Assess First, we've created 3 assessments called Brain, Drive and Shape to assess these aspects. What is great is that when we actually identify these 3 key factors, we can identify the natural talents of the individual. So what intrinsically comes easier to somebody rather than another candidate or another person going for the job. We all have these things, those traits, those activities that make us and help us be able to reach the highest level of performance. Establishing their fit within the specific context of the job you're hiring for, their fit within their existing team, and their fit within the existing company culture will really be able to help us understand if that individual and that individual's natural talents will fit into the role and the company that you are within and that you're recruiting for. And so, what are the criteria we should be focusing upon and we need to concentrate on when considering personality, motivation and reasoning, and this idea of being as successful as we can be? Well, that really depends. It really depends upon the job, upon the company, upon the team. There's no magic formula. We've actually conducted a study ourselves here at Asses First. It's always interesting to use your own data to discover things. So between the years of 2008 and 2018, we've taken all of the data that we have between this time frame. So that equates to over 5 million sets of data across 40 different countries and cultures. And this has allowed us to compare those that work in both a traditional working environment and, interestingly so, those that work in a more digital and tech-driven environment, those who have already conducted or have started to conduct their technical transformations. We speak a lot about transformation. We know that things are moving quicker. There is a demand for more of everything. We all search, for those fantastic candidates, that top talent who will move and grow company transformations. And so we said, do you know what? We'll compare those two different types of team members who are in these different types of companies to see actually if there is a difference between those individuals between the two. Now, there are 3 things that have actually come out of the study. First, the team members who have evolved in both of these enterprises or types of enterprises will, with success, are those who have advanced better and quicker, have a better reasoning capacity. And when I speak about reasoning capability and capacity, I'm referring to something that we call the G factor, which we assess in one of our assessments. It's called the General Intelligence Factor. And this is analysed on a scoring level between 1 and 10. And a score larger than 7 will demonstrate that that individual will achieve success better, quicker, and have more evolution in their professional career. Now, the second point concerning motivations is those individuals are set in motion by specific motivations. So those who are considered successful are driven by specific motivations. Now, there are 2 big families of motivations. There's a lot more types of motivations that we evaluate, 20 to be exact. But if you look at all of the motivations, you will be able to categorize them into 2 different groups. First off, preserved motivations, and secondly, energizing motivations. And so to really understand this concept, you must imagine this central circle in blue here as the comfort zone. So imagine an individual in a certain situation, and we all retreat into a comfort zone when we're feeling a little bit vulnerable. It's the familiar, it's the known, and the rest here in this image, the red zone, that's ultimately, well, the unknown, the aspects that don't necessarily provide comfort and reassurance. You must know that those individuals who are set in motion by preserved motivations are those that do not have a natural tendency to venture into this red zone. What ultimately then will happen in a circumstance like this for those who aren't set in motion by those preserved motivations? Well, over time, you'll see the zone of comfort will slowly get smaller and smaller and smaller. And therefore, by design, the individual will feel paralyzed and trapped. Now, when we have somebody who is put in motion or really pushed by energizing motivations, well, they will have a natural tendency to discover outside of their comfort zone. So the complete opposite of what we just saw. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily that they'll feel at ease doing it, but they will be more naturally inclined to explore. They will create a progressive zone in grey that you can see has appeared here that will allow them to feel and become more and more at ease and will have an enlarged comfort zone that they will have adapted. And the more that you do that, or the more that somebody does that in general, the more you will be able to deal and cope with new situations in information. Finally, the third point was their personality. So here we have 8 dimensions that we highlighted were specific, super specific dimensions that define those that succeeded better than others. I'll leave you to have a quick look at those on this radar, the 20 personality traits that we assess around the edge here. Those criteria in green, we can see are traits that are associated with those who are more likely to succeed. So somebody who is very assertive with others or scores very highly in the trait of trying to convince others is somebody who is associated or is a trait associated with someone who is more likely to succeed. Now, when you combine these 3 factors together, so the general intelligence factor I spoke about, scoring greater than 7, somebody set in motion by energizing motivation, so those who feel comfortable at exploring outside of that comfort zone, and finally, those in possession of those 8 dimensions, it will represent the model A player. And this can be used in the detection of the potential of somebody. And actually, we have more and more companies now using this model to really highlight and identify those who are most likely to achieve. Now, those A players perform better from a quantitative point of view, perform quicker, so they'll get things done a lot faster, and they produce more. But the question to pose is that that's all okay, that's all fine, but we're never alone when we're working. We're never just, we're always in contact with somebody. And so how do we take into account the fact that we do not work alone? Now, there are 2 things that I want to speak about surrounding this question. First, agriculture, which I'll explain in a second. And secondly, the theory of atoms. Bear with me. So when we talk about this future of work, we speak a lot about things that are difficult to be certain of course. And in today's day and age, I guess you can say, it's even more the case that there are a lot of uncertainties. There's a lot of people concerned about losing their jobs, about the company that they're working for going under. But there is one thing when we look at all of that and look at the future in particular, one thing that we can definitely be certain of, that when we recruit somebody, we can't just recruit them based upon their capacity to do the job. Why? Well, quite simply, because they will work in an environment that is cross-functional, that is collaborative, and their work will be impacted and impact a huge group around them. And so this requirement in a role to work alongside others will only accelerate as teams become more and more collaborative and teamwork more and more essential. And so your capacity as an HR or TA representative, or your HR and TA representative's capacity to objectively measure and develop the interpersonal skills of the group will become more and more important. They will need to really be able to have the eye to identify that potential. And when we look at several studies, it's apparent that collaboration is considered currently the 3rd most important competency that is desired in candidates for team members on a global level. So it really isn't going anywhere. Now, each team member, on the other hand, will be contacted or approached or asked to do something more and more as time goes on, to give their opinion or to help someone as the working environment becomes more and more team focused. This will lead to something that is called collaborative overload, collaborative surcharge for team members. So if, for example, we take a standard team member, one who works a standard contract length with a general workload, this team member will spend approximately 6 hours a day collaborating with another team member, whether that be mail, whether it be telephone, whether it be in person, whether it be in group meetings or video meetings. 6 hours a day, which is a lot of time. And so to optimize that, we've implemented, like actually a lot of companies I know, and probably like a lot of you guys, certain tools to ensure efficient communication. Slack, for example, for messaging, general communication, document transferring, just to make that process a lot more smooth. We also organise team building activities as well, and of course nights out for the team, to really ensure that the affinity between team members is as positive as it can be. But all of that considering, is that really the solution? Does that really enable or enhance a team to be more efficient? Now, when we look at the satisfaction and production efficiency of millions of teams around the world, we can see that actually 75% of teams are not functional, leaving us with approximately 25% of teams successfully working and producing results together. And that is the equivalent of it being, in theory, easier to win something on the roulette tables at Las Vegas than it is to manage and develop a successful team. But what really interests us is why. Why is that the case that so little teams function efficiently? Well, it's this cow that will give us the answer. And this is the link. This is a circle back to agriculture. I'm going to explain to you or talk to you about something called the Ringelmann Effect. Now, Ringelmann was a French agriculture engineer, hence the link with the cow. And he devised this, what is now called the Ringelmann Effect, which is basically the tendency for individual members of a group to become increasingly less productive as the size of their group increases. So Ringelmann actually illustrates the inverse relationship that exists between the size of a group and the magnitude of group members' individual contribution to the completion of a task. Now, he originally thought individual work, when working in a large group, would plot like this, you know, everybody in theory would put in the same amount of effort and a consistent amount of effort as to whether they were, you know, kind of working alone or otherwise. Now, actually, in reality, what happened was, well, they actually performed like this. So you can see their performance on an individual level as the group size increased, became actually less. He actually discovered that as more and more people added to a group, the group often becomes increasingly inefficient, and ultimately, you know, kind of violating or moving away from this notion that group effort and team participation reliably leads to increased effort on behalf of the members. If anything, it's the complete opposite. Now, the loss of productivity was contributed to the interactions made between team members. So, you know, the bigger the group size, the more distractions there are, the more people there are to talk and chat to. Hence why, obviously, the individual basis individuals are less efficient. So what that ultimately will mean, I guess, is that managers and HR teams need to really focus upon the optimizing and efficiency of interactions between team members. It's not the only focus. Actually, their interactions, even if they're central to the team, only represent a section of what a team actually does. There's three aspects of a team that I'll show you now. The first is interactions, what we've been speaking about. The second is results. So they're tangible figures and outcome of a team working together. Also their satisfaction of working together, which is important. And finally, inputs. Now, the inputs are described as everything that you're going to be putting into your system. I'm going to make just a quick analogy with cooking. I don't know if there's any, you know, kind of wannabe chefs out there. For those of you who do like cooking, imagine you're trying to find that perfect pastry recipe. If you use ingredients that are of poor quality, then you're likely to be able to tell this in the final product, right? I'm no chef, but I've got a couple of opinions on this one. Even if you are, say, a Michelin star chef, that will normally tend to always be the case. And so for your team, it will be a little bit of the same. What ingredients, therefore, do you need to put into your system in order that your team are efficient and can withstand the current very changeable environment? Well, the answer is in the physics of atoms. An atom, obviously in a manner very simplified, looks like this. You'll find three elements. So the protons, the neutrons, and the electrons. Now, those school years probably will be coming back to you guys. But each will play a particular role and bring a different energy to the atom. The proton and neutron will merge to create the nucleus of the atom. And this is ultimately where all of the interactions of the element are at their strongest. And so the affinity between these guys is inevitably strong. The electron will then gravitate around the atom in a more distant manner, I guess you could call it, and we'll also find electrons that are completely detached from the atom, which we will call free electrons. I think that's the scientific word for them. So the day that the connection between that nuclear power becomes weaker, what will happen? Well, in theory, in short, a big explosion. And so each atom will have a structure very precise, very calculated to ensure that the overall structure remains stabilized and efficient, and ultimately this sort of thing doesn't happen. And so this atom, which actually is super tiny, there's trillions and trillions, obviously, that make up each of us, it has two big characteristics that will ultimately determine its efficiency. First is the affinity between the elements that I spoke about before. The second is the energy. Now, this energy is going to allow each component to do the role that it very specifically needs to do in order for everything to work. Furthermore, is that these two dimensions allow us to explain the structure of the universe, who you're going to fall in love with, and, you guessed it, bringing it back round, the efficiency of your team. So the potential of a team today is not defined by procedures. It's not necessarily defined by planning, or reframing, frameworks and putting structure into place, but is defined by a combination of the team's affinity and the energy between individuals. So first off, taking affinity, what do we mean by affinity? Well, we're talking about the natural affinity between two people, their natural ability to grow, to develop together on a day-to-day basis. And we can assess affinity at two different levels. First off, interacting, how well do they actually get on? And secondly, their level of productivity. How successful are they at getting the job done, which obviously is very important. And you can see here that what we're actually able to do within our tool is assess both of these so that you've got a little bit of foresight into how to look to create and develop your teams. Now, I know you'll say, right, birds of a feather flock together though, right? Similar people will ultimately do a better job. Actually, that's not necessarily the case. For example, let's say that we were to get two team members working together who are very similar, that you can see here are the green dot is heading towards similar profiles, and B, have aspirations that are very similar. So behaviors and aspirations that are very, very similar. They would get on really, really well, they'd be the best of friends, but they may not be as efficient as possible. What about if you were to have two team members whose behavior and aspirations were complementary? It will be very difficult for these two people to work together. Possibly possible in the short term, but for the long term, a lot more difficult. Now, what is interesting and normally tends to be the most successful combination is a mixture of the two. So it's to look at somebody who has complementary behaviors, or two individuals who have complementary behaviors and similar aspirations, similar drives and similar motivations. So tomorrow, when you're analyzing a team, you will want to compare all of these connections between your team member to see quickly if they would work well together. You'll have some connections that will really complement each other to form a really strong connection between the groups. You can see here, professional affinity between these two individuals is at 87%. It's pretty high. Equally, you could have some connections which are a lot more weak and could be potentially a sign of conflict, or a source of a potential conflict in the future. It would be interesting as well, as you can see here, to see how individuals score against the general format of a team as a whole, so the team affinity. To see as well the transitivity affinity between team members, and that's basically the relationships between two members that aren't necessarily direct. They don't necessarily work directly with each other, but they still communicate. Or identify as well those stronger links between your team. Who are those individuals who may well boost your team? And finally, identifying those who are possibly more isolated within the team, as you can see here. So this individual on the right hand side, you can see is slightly more isolated and finds it a little bit more difficult to integrate and be involved. Now, this aspect of a team I just spoke about represents between 25 and 30% of the efficiency and future success of the team, and can definitely be used to avoid any conflict between team members and their personalities and their motivations. The second dimension of the affinity that I mentioned is this aspect of energy. Now, tomorrow somebody's job and area of industry will become a lot more irrelevant. Why? Because it's becoming more and more rare now to find somebody who follows the same industry all of their for the whole lifespan of their career. And so because of that, teams will become ever more changing and will be a lot more adaptable. That means that actually we won't be able to recruit in the same manner, i.e. just focusing upon the individual and just focusing on what they can offer. We need to really look at how they will work together within a team. What ultimately will be important to know and understand is what level of energy a candidate can bring to the team, and what complementary aspects will they bring to the team that others maybe won't do. To know also what role they would fit into, whether it be a leadership role, whether it be another type of role. You can think about this and you can analyze this data to be able to understand ahead of time what would suit them best. And also to profit and use this information from a global team perspective to really understand what energy is missing, even going to the point of understanding whose energy is most prominent within the team, and whose energy is possibly less prominent within the team, meaning that maybe they aren't in and amongst that right fit of people in comparison to who they are. And so tomorrow, well, it certainly looks a lot different to this time last year. But if we want to remain relevant and achieve success, well, despite the current situation, as a team, as a group, it's really important considering using sociometric data, which is basically a term that sums up all that I've spoken about with regards to team analysis. It explains the analysis of team members and their relationship and perception of each other. So moving away from being part of a collaboration overload as time moves forward, and to use tools, including artificial intelligence, to look at analysing the collective potential of individuals and maximising the use of this type of information. And what will that mean? Well, tomorrow kind of already is today. Why? Well, because we can select already using our platform, out of a large group of people, individuals who work well together. We can request that they take our 3 assessments here at Access First, assessing personality, motivation, and mental agility, reasoning capacity. And from that, we're able to establish their level of success. What will they have when working within a team? We can tell you who is the most integrated within the group, and that the relationships across the group in general are actually very homogeneous or not. We can see that, well, in this example, Chris and Charlotte here are the most natural and therefore the most productive. And quite the opposite here, Jack, Louise's relationship is not very strong, and they do not have a very strong affinity. We also give details of each individual's contribution to the team and the team that would best suit their natural disposition. And finally, Fred here, well, we can tell you that he's the manager who would be the most natural and would have the best fit to this role, within the group. Quite simply because his leadership style is what is written here, based upon visionary and a winner aspect. And those who work well with him are appreciative of complementary leadership styles. And so, in a nutshell, the creation of a team has, I guess, become a science. And especially in this current situation, which brings with it a lot of challenges and unknowns, data and information above instinct and personal opinion will serve you well, not just on a personal level in terms of your progression, but also in creation of teams, redeployment of teams during this time that may be going on. We all have the goal, I am sure, right now, of remaining relevant and remaining successful in a time whereby we need to prove ourselves irreplaceable and valuable to the workplace. And our best friend in that is certainly information, self-awareness, and putting people at the forefront of our priorities. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening in. I'm just going to see if there's any specific questions. I don't think we've got the chat on. There are no specific questions for the moment. There's no specific question for the moment, but I'm free to answer. Here you go. There is one question here from Shashan. Apologies if I pronounce this wrong. Shashanandan. So, how to focus in times of uncertainty? Interesting question. I guess, do you mean on a personal level, I assume? In which case, I guess using a good, on a personal level, brilliant. I guess I could use the really British saying here, keep calm and carry on. but I guess it's all about taking it right back to the basics and thinking, okay, obviously right now, today, you know, in whatever situation you're in, personally with work or personally at home, is going to be difficult. And I think it's important to think, what are the basics, ultimately, what, outside of everything, all of the noise that's going on, what do you need to focus upon individually? And it's important to take the time to think that through and to focus it. Now, people who have been maybe on furlough may have had that time to do that. But it's about really just taking it, I guess, as an opportunity and stopping, thinking, and really kind of getting yourself to refocus and to prioritize, even if it's a case of just writing things down. I'm personally a super fan of lists. Just kind of getting it clear in your head as to what do you need to do to move forward. Ultimately, what are your goals? Because that's going to define, you know, which direction you then want to decide to go in. Hopefully that's answered your question. I think that's all of the questions that we have. I fear to fly in an aeroplane. Very silly. That's not very silly, but how to overcome. Do you know what? So I used to be very, very similar to you. And I remember a specific, it was a horrible, horrible flight where I was literally shaking and crying for the whole 10 hours. So I completely know how you feel. How to overcome it? I think I personally just tried to, in that moment, you try to think, well, you're automatically thinking very irrationally. You think about what's the worst of the situation that can happen. And so I guess it's all about, again, thinking, okay, what's the likelihood, thinking about the numbers, what the likelihood, God forbid, that, you know, anything would happen, and just trying to get back to reality a little bit more. That and some sleeping pills helped me. Brilliant. So guys, thank you very, very much for listening in. I hope that's given you some food for thought. I think our presentation and everything will be available online. I guess I'll hand it back over to hr.com now.
I'd like to thank our sponsor, Assess First, and our presenters, as well as all of you for joining us today. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that opened in a new browser page on your computer. This concludes this webcast session. We hope you've been enjoying and inspired. Enjoy the rest of your day.